give you something after all the things that have been said about me. 3 things I would like to say before I begin. One of them is that I'm not a scholar. I'm not an expert on any subject. Writers never are experts. They gather enough knowledge for the subject they're going to be talking about, writing about, and that's it. So I cannot give you a scholarly, legal, expert this thing about this freedom of right to speech and expression. So you'll have to put up with my own views. It's a writer's point of view. And then, secondly, I would also like to say in this talk, for the first time, I have made a change. For a long time, it was understood that he included she, when literally it does not. HE does not include SHE. And when feminism came, became a problem because all kinds of things were tried, experiments, to have an inclusive pronoun, which never worked, to say she instead of he, to say he instead of her. Ultimately, I used to write he slash he. She comes first. Ideology has to be satisfied. But I found afterwards that that is very clumsy. So now I use the pronoun she, unless specifically I want to talk about a male. So she will include he, and I hope you'll understand that. Let me begin. My topic is how free is the writer? Susie Taru and K. Lalita began their 2-volume seminal book, Women Writing in India, with the story of a woman, Bangalore Nagaratnamma. She was so delighted by a poem, Radhika Santwanam, written by Muddu Palani, a courtesan poet like Nagaratna herself, but of the previous century. Nagaratna, as a result of her pleasure in that book, decided to get the poem reprinted. When the book came out, both Nagaratnama and the publisher were charged with publishing an obscene book. The government banned the book in the interest of, I quote, the moral health of their subjects. A noted Telugu writer and social reformer said that the poet used, I quote again, using the excuse of Sringara Rasa, filled her poems with crude descriptions of sex, unquote, and called Muddu Palani shameless and an adulteress. Nagaratnama, in her very erudite and passionate defense of the book, said that several men had written even more crudely about sex, but it was of no use. The book was banned. I opened this talk with this book and what happened to it because it seems to me that it contains all the issues that surround the banning of a book. There's the issue of morality, of the government making itself the guardian of people's morals, the social condemnation of the book, and the idea that a woman's writing had to be as moral as a woman herself had to be, and so on. Not to forget the problem of colonial rulers being ignorant of the culture of the country they were ruling. Even today, the state is the most powerful force that can control a writer's work, either on the grounds of national security or of morality and obscenity. These are the very visible forces. There are, besides, other pressures on a writer, which are perhaps equally hazardous to a writer's freedom, but they are not very visible. Generally, writers themselves very rarely think of how free they are, because as citizens of a democratic country, they take the right to freedom of speech for granted. If the writer thinks of anything at all, it is about publication. Like, will I get a publisher? Will the publisher give the book its due? Will it get good and quick reviews? And finally, will it sell well? These are a writer's professional anxieties. The freedom to write is for most writers part of the writing process. Now, nevertheless, it has always been recognized that a writer's freedom matters because she writes of the society she lives in and often speaks for society. As Toni Morrison said, writers bear witness to an age. However, it is also to be understood that the writer has the same right to freedom of speech which an ordinary citizen has and is not specially privileged in this matter. Boris Pasternak, the author of Dr. Zhivago, speaking of his novel, said it was his duty to make a statement about his epoch. His novel gave the reader a very vivid picture of post-World War I, post-revolution Russia. Pasternak added that the writing of Dr. Zhivago was an attempt to repay the debt he owed his contemporaries. Not many writers can speak of their writing with such clarity and profundity, but Pasternak was living and writing in a totalitarian state in which neither criticism of nor dissent from the state was allowed. Pasternak was aware that his novel would never be published.
This meeting is being recorded.
Pasternak was aware that his novel would never be published in Russia. However, even writers living in democratic countries have spoken in equally evocative words of a writer's right to freedom of speech. Ursula Le Guin, an American science fiction writer, calls literature, I quote, the only guide to the country we are visiting, life, unquote. Without literature, we will be living without directions, without signposts, without maps. Our own Supreme Court recently re-emphasized the importance of our freedom of speech by ruling that there can be no more curbs on the right to freedom of speech and expression apart from what the Constitution has listed in Article 19. We in India had a taste of what it was to lose this right when, the day after emergency was declared in the country, actually it was declared at the middle of the night, we woke up to a newspaper with a blank front page and another with a blank editorial and opinions page. I do not know how many people in this room would have been there at the time, but I was, and I remember this most distinctly. There was a blanket censorship of the media. The very blankness of the pages more telling than 1,000 words. National security is a very valid reason for imposing restrictions on the right to freedom of speech. But what is national security is a moot question. Often it is the security of the government, of a leader who wants to silence both dissent and criticism. Times of crisis are also met with the suppression of this right. 9/11 gave the USA a chance to indulge in excesses against individual rights, which would never have been possible otherwise. Sarah Peretsky, an American crime writer, in her book, Writing in an Age of Silence, gives a frightening picture of what happened in a country regarded as one of the great democracies in the world, of the extreme steps the government took in the name of protecting the state. Just a second. Forgive me. There are also authorities other than the state which can ban books, operating under the umbrella of the state, of course. For an example, A.K. Ramanujan's essay, 300 Ramayanas, 5 examples, and 3 thoughts on translation, was removed from the syllabus of the Delhi University on a complaint made against the essay. Not just this, the publishers withdrew the book containing the essay from the market and agreed not to include it in any anthology. A controversy erupted. I read Ramanujan's essay in Paula Vishnu's anthology, Many Ramayanas. It's a brilliant scholarly essay which analyzes and compares the many retellings of the Ramayana, both in India and in Southeast Asia. In these places, Ramayana says, no one ever reads the Mahabharata and the Ramayana for the first time. The stories are there, quoting him always, already. He then speaks of his purpose. I would like to sort out for myself how these hundreds of telling of a story in different cultures, languages, and religious traditions relate to each other. What gets translated, transplanted, transposed. Hard to believe that an essay written on these lines can offend anyone, or, as so often happens today, hurt the feelings of some people. We have very sensitive people now, anything can hurt them. But clearly it was considered harmful and the essay was banned. This imbroglio brings to my mind an old Sanskrit play, Uttar Ramacharitam by Bhavabhuti, who lived in the 8th century. The play is set in a time after Sri Ram sent a pregnant Sita to the forest on the words of one citizen. In his book, Drama and Sanskrit Literature, the author, Professor R.B. Jagirdar, calls Bhavabhuti, quote, the only writer who had the courage and the greatness of an artist to depict Sri Ram as an ordinary man. In this play, Sri Ram is far removed from the man who stoically watched Sita into the fire in Lanka. He is not the ruthless man who exiled Sita from his kingdom. He is suffering from guilt. He is repentant, full of remorse at what he did to Sita. In the play, The entire family is in the forest, including Sita's sons, Lava and Kusha. The boys don't know the visitors are family, nor does the family know that the twins are Sita's sons. Hearing that Sri Ram has come to the forest, Lava mockingly tells Kusha, "Better be careful, brother. We have a hero among us now." Later, he even calls Rama very pityingly an old man. Bhagavati has put Rama's divinity aside and, with the courage of a creative art writer, made him a man. I'm curious. Was this play staged? How was it received? Were there problems about Sri Ram, who had already become a god by then, being spoken of in the way Lava spoke of him? Religion has always been a great force, one that allows for no view other than what is in the holy books, or rather, the official interpretation of it. If the state found treason and sedition great crimes, religion considered blasphemy and heresy just as criminal. Socrates was forced to drink poison for corrupting the young and for professing atheism. In Europe, kings and emperors knelt to the Pope. To be excommunicated by the Pope was the greatest punishment for a ruler and for his country. Nothing could happen in the country. No weddings could take place, no baptisms, even deaths could not be done because there would be no priest would go to do anything. We all know the story of Galileo, who was tried by the church for supporting in his book Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. This book, he supported the heliocentric theory of Nicholas Copernicus. Though Copernicus himself received only a private admonition for his theory, Galileo was publicly tried, convicted of heresy, and his book was banned. A greater humiliation was that Galileo's sentence was publicly proclaimed in different cities of Europe. In a letter, Galileo spoke of, I quote, "this war against me, which continually constrains me and undercuts me in all directions." He also said in the same letter that there was, I quote, "a most general and rigorous order against all my works, everything published and everything I might have published in the future, so that it is left to me to succumb in silence." Succumb in silence. In these words, we can see the agony of an author whose work is taken away from him. Socrates was perhaps more fortunate in being allowed to die. There's also the painful matter of self-censorship. This is not a censorship imposed by the state or a religious institution, but a self-imposed ban by a writer, the result of hostility of society or of the readership to the writing. Thomas Hardy is a striking example. Two of his novels, Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Jude the Obscure, considered his best, got into trouble. The system then was to first serialize the novel in a magazine, after which it would go into book form. The editor of the magazine, serializing Hardy's novels, asked him to cut out some passages in the novel, as they would be otherwise considered not suitable for a family readership. In one of the families, Jude the Obscure, Jude lived with a woman and had children by her without marriage, which was an abomination to Victorian ideas of morality. Though Hardy did what the editor wanted him to, he was so disgusted with what was done to his novels, so exhausted with the editing out and putting back of passages, that he decided he would write no more novels. He kept his word. He turned to poetry instead. He said, "If Galileo had said in verse that the earth moved, the Inquisition might have left him alone." But poetry lacks the discursiveness of prose, which Hardy needed to express his large vision of human destiny. Hardy was effectively as silenced as Galileo. In India, we have had Perumal Murugan, who, greatly troubled by the hostile public response to his work, declared himself dead. Fortunately, a judge equally dramatically told him to come back to life and write. So that story had a happy ending. Kiran Nagarkar, whom we know as an English writer, had his first novel in Marathi so badly mauled by the Marathi critics that he moved to writing in English. He never wrote in Marathi again. Critics can certainly be destructive, but is it possible for them to silence writers? It is in the nature, I'm quoting, "it is in the nature of the artist to mind excessively what is said about them." Virginia Woolf's words. She is right in this, but when she goes on to say, "literature is strewn with the wreckage of men who have minded beyond reason the opinion of others," I disagree. Byron, in a poem written after Keats' death, said Keats was killed off by one critic, which is not true. He died of tuberculosis. How could a man who said, I shall be among the English poets after my death, die because of a critic's words? And there is our own Bhavbhuti, who very obviously, much hurt by critics' responses, threw them a great challenge. Very loosely translated, what he said in his play Malati Madhavam was, I know some of you don't like my work, but someday someone will be born who will understand me, for time is endless and the earth is vast. What a splendid affirmation of his own words. However, consistent criticism can destroy an author's creativity. In today's world, scathing public criticism of an artist's work has become a feature of life. And with the coming of social media, it is 1,000 times more powerful than what it was in the times of Thomas Hardy. In fact, Wodehouse, the last person you would think would talk of this, long back called it the power of pressure groups and the curse of our times. Now it is called cancel culture, which is a rather strange word for a boycott, because boycott is what the social media critics call for, either of an art form or of an artist. Often the hostility stems from hatred of an ideology other than the one the protesters profess, whereas creative writing abhors ideology. What the writer has is a vision. The writer follows this vision in all her writing. The writer's freedom is really the freedom of the writing from any imperatives. To call for a ban on a piece of art in the name of religion or an ideology is to destroy this freedom. Unfortunately, the social media has given people a chance and a space to say things about artists and their art, which they would never have had otherwise. The world is now full of critics who, without knowledge and understanding, pass judgment on a work without hesitation. The constitution makers, I'm sure, never envisaged trolling when they gave the citizens the right to freedom of speech and expression. Just a moment. Sorry. A more subtle means of silencing is running down the work and belittling both the voice and what is said. I have personal knowledge of this dismissive attitude. I quote two examples. One was in Australia when I was touring the country with three other Indian writers. During a radio interview, the interviewer asked me, do you do yoga? And the next question, do you cook curry for your husband? I was flabbergasted. Surely he had been told I was a writer. Why then the talk of yoga, cooking curry, and feeding husbands? Because I was a woman, of course. My writing was a non-issue. I think I need some more water. Other episode happened in India. A professional interview in a national magazine called me a grandmother in the heading. My grandson was with us at the time and he had come into the room for a few moments. What was much worse was that they did not understand that they had insulted me or pretended not to. They did not answer my question whether they would have called a male author or grandfather in a professional interview. I now know that they took me and the offense to me very lightly. Years later, very recently, when I told my grandson, who is now in his late 20s, this episode and how I was called a grandmother because of him, he laughed hysterically. I mean, I thought that just showed that that's the way to treat it. But at that moment, I was angry. I was very angry. I know that they took me and the offense to me very lightly. My years of work on a novel, my giving up of everything in my life except the novel, becoming a stranger at times to my own life in these years, these were of no account, it seemed. Long after this happened, I read Ursula Le Guin, the writer I have quoted earlier. I quote her again with great pleasure. Don't give me a headstone, she says in an essay, that says I am someone's grandmother. If I have a headstone, I want my name on it. It was eerie, like a voice coming out of the past to support me. Yet my understanding did not change anything. Novel after novel, I went on hoping that my novel would be read as a novel, not as a women's novel. It never happened. It was hard to understand this belittling, this slighting, not of one book or of a few, but of an entire class of literature, and only because of gender. The result can be disastrous for the writer. The fact is, the only thing a writer can depend on is her self-confidence. There is nothing else going for her. Nobody is waiting for her work. She does not know if any publisher will accept it. And even after acceptance, she has no idea how many readers it will have or whether it will have any readers at all. The thin plank of self-confidence is all that authors have to stand on. But if you are constantly and consistently told that your work is trivial, that your themes are small, that your world is limited, and that you write about insignificant people like women, then self-confidence is eroded bit by bit. Women writers in earlier times adopted a pseudonym to combat the prejudice against their writing, which, however, meant that they erased themselves from the body of writers. Another defense was to strictly eschew the woman's point of view, to try to write as a man. Oh, you could go back to silence. It is so painful to be pushed into a slot, never to be understood, that perhaps retreating into silence would be easier. But for some reason, it was never a choice for me, as I'm sure it was not for many women. For writing is an urge. It cannot be picked up and put down at will. What was left was to go on writing in my own way, not to give up. Hermione Lee, in a biography of an English writer, Penelope Fitzgerald, says, she did not expect fame, but she knew her own worth. I think that was how it was for me and for many other writers, women writers, compelled to go on in spite of the denigration. However, the constant fight in the writer herself against a sense of low self-worth cannot but influence the writing. I strongly believe that the idea of women's writing being trivial has come from a gross misreading of their work. I give one example. This is of Jane Austen, whose novels, especially as they are shown in movies today, seem to be about love, courtship, and marriage. However, underlying this concern is the great problem of women having no money of their own, of their total dependence on a male if they are unmarried, which is why marriage matters so much, which is why Mrs. Bennet was chasing bachelors. Jane Austen brought out this unpleasant truth by, in inverted commas, telling it slant, as Emily Dickinson had once said. Things are changing. A woman's experience is slowly gaining value as a part of the human experience. Two women, Nobel laureates, Doris Lessing and Annie Ernaux, have been cited as having given the world a greater knowledge of the female experience. Doris Lessing, in the citation, was called the epicist of the female experience, while Annie Ernaux has been regarded as bearing witness to women's experience and memory. Annie Ernaux, though, does not believe that women have become equal to men in freedom and power. Women, she thinks, censor themselves, which is true, because women live in a silken web of relationships which can be so easily destroyed. Will I hurt someone by what I write? Is the thought in a woman's mind. Ruthlessness comes hard to her. Writing my memoirs, listen to me, I had to ask myself, would I censor myself because I could hurt somebody? In the early years of my writing, I had a strange feeling as I wrote of standing on a stage under a spotlight. To one who liked to be unseen, reclusive, this was frightening. But at no time did I think of sanitizing my writing, if I may use the word. Too many ideas had been suppressed in me for too long for me to continue poking them inside. There is yet another agency which can silence an author, and that is the market. Since publishers invest money in bringing out books, they hope not only to get that money back, but also to earn some profit, and you can't blame them. And therefore, one of the things that publishers look at is the saleability of the book. If they think it is not saleable, they would rather not publish the book. I can quote the English writer Barbara Pym as an example of being silenced by market forces. A writer who had 6 novels published, she found the 7th hard to sell. She had over 20 rejections. Her book was not quite right for the market, she was told by every publisher. And so she was silenced. For 7 years, she wrote nothing. I am no longer an author, she wrote in her diary, very sadly. If, as Sarah Peretsky said, a writer's difficult journey is a movement from silence to speech, the journey from speech to silence is even more difficult, in fact. The market forces are too strong for any writer to resist. The ultimate and the greatest abomination is the burning of books. Not just books, entire libraries have been burned. It's a destruction of knowledge, of the human imagination, of human stories, of human memory itself. Susan Orlean, in her book, The Library Book, calls those who burn books and libraries as terrorists. Her book is about the burning of the Los Angeles Central Library, but it goes on to speaking of what books and libraries mean to humankind. She writes of the enthusiasm in Nazi Germany for burning books by the communists and Jews. And quotes, ironically, a German poet, Heinrich Heine, who said, there where they burn books, they will in the end burn men. Prophetic words. One piece of good news for humankind is that words, ideas, books don't die very easily. Our old classics have miraculously survived the centuries, some of them transmitted down the ages through that wondrous human faculty of memory. Muthupalani's book kept circulating even after the ban. So did Galileo's dialogue, copies of which smuggled out and sold on the black market outside there. But he didn't get the money, I'm sure. Banned books from Soviet Russia, Pasternak's and Solzhenitsyn, for example, were also smuggled out of the country and published and read by the world. James Joyce's Ulysses and D.H. Lawrence's Lady Chatterley's Lover, the books most banned through the world. I saw this, I went to Google and looked this up, have been resurrected. These two books have been resurrected. I see that Lady Chatterley's Lover is now on Netflix. What a change. So variable are the ideas of morality. I cannot end without speaking of Salman Rushdie, who for years lived under the sentence of death pronounced on him by a religious head. To escape this sentence, he was for many years constantly on the run. Yet he never stopped writing. And recently, just when the fatwa seemed to be forgotten, he was viciously attacked and badly injured. But his new novel, Pictricity, Vijayanagar, has just come out and is being hailed by critics all over as a great work. It looks like he has gone back to the writer he had promised to be early in his career, the writer he was meant to be. The final words of the novel, quoted by many reviewers, are words are the only victors. Very telling words. As long as the human spirit, the human imagination, and words come together, it will be difficult to silence writers. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for tracing the various contexts of censorship from various literatures and cultures. You began with censorship during the British rule of the book Radhika Santavanam and the censorship and restrictions thereafter, the emergency when India woke up to newspapers with blank pages and editorials, freedom in the context of national security that went to an extreme after 9/11, and made a reference to A.K. Ramanujan's essay, Many Ramayanas being removed from the Delhi University and the controversy following that, and censorship in retelling stories, especially religious narratives, as they hurt the sentiments, heresy and blasphemy coming from unofficial interpretations related to religious narratives, and censorship defense by women through either writing using a pseudonym or completely becoming silent, and self censorship, where the writer imposes censorship on the self when the contents of literary texts may not be accepted in the society, and scathing public criticism that can impact the creativity of a writer, and the concept of cancel culture and the impact of social media on promoting and canceling ideologies, of how women censor themselves constantly by thinking, will I hurt someone, or whether I should be ruthless, and also the censorship that the market does by silencing writers when it is keen on profit, and therefore making writers focus more on the saleability of the book than their creativity, and of how burning of books and libraries destroy knowledge and human stories and human memories, and finally how books, though books have been banned, they have been smuggled and resurrected and have gone beyond the ideas of morality. So thank you, ma'am, for your very invigorating speech. Now is a time for question and answer. So I request the audience to kindly unmute yourself and pose your questions, or you can also share your questions on the chat box.
May I repeat the question?
The participants may kindly raise your hand and we will unmute you so that you can pose your question.
Ma'am, since we were talking about censorship this whole time, I have one. I recently read the classic novel To Kill a Mockingbird, which was released, which is released. Oh, sorry about that. So I recently read
Uh, can you go on?
I'm sorry, I think she's offline. We'll go to Shivangi. Shivangi, you may ask your question.
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I want to thank Christ College for conducting such a session. Ma'am, my question to you is, you mentioned the sensitivity that is prevalent in the society right now, and if you are writing something related to religious controversial stuff that is going right now, so how to not let the sensitivity that is prevalent in the society affect our creativity when we are writing something and we want to express that stuff. So this is my question, ma'am.
Ma'am, kindly unmute the mic.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I have not spoken of the contemporary situation for two reasons. One is that one gets mired in controversy, and number two, I think it's a developing situation. We still do not know which way we are moving, so we'll wait and see how things happen. But one thing is there, that it is very hard to for a writer. You know, I mean, a lot of us have thought about this, that we can write what we want to, but are we willing to face the consequences? You know, and you don't face the consequences all alone. Your family is a part of it. So I think one is a little hesitant. One has to say that. It's very nice to think that writers have a lot of courage and that, you know, they will be able to do whatever they want. So one of the things, like I have quoted in my talk about Emily Dickinson saying, "Tell it slant." I think that is one of the ways to talk, when you do not sort of directly kind of accuse anyone, but the inferences are there. But on the whole, it a lot depends on what kind of situation there is in the country, the atmosphere in the country, the political situation, of course. So I cannot sort of give a general answer. It's up to every author. Authors don't act in unison. Very rarely do authors come together. Hilary Mantel says authors are a party of one. That is the truth. Each one is an individual, and it's very rare that you find them coming together. Each one's ideas will be different. So it's going to be, if at all, a very single struggle. I mean, Rushdie, when he was, the fatwa came upon him, in England, they did try to sort of, the writers did try to sort of form a group, but it's no use. You can't protect him. I mean, you're saying that you're supporting him is absolutely of no use, as they found out now. So I think it's a very difficult question, and I cannot answer generally for all writers. But I do think that there are people who have a great amount of courage, and one can only hope that we have some writers of that amount of courage among us when the time comes who will speak.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll move on to Ms. Soumya Deep.
Yes, I suppose I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizer, and I have been extremely delighted and enlightened by your talk, madam. I have actually I have done my MPhil on your novels, and I am right now pursuing my PhD on your children's texts. So I have actually two questions for you. One is, how free is the women writer in voicing for men's issues and problems? This is number one. And the second question is almost a kind of allied issue to this, which is how free is the adult writer in voicing forth the issues and problems of children with all authenticity that you have done brilliantly. So these are actually my questions to you, ma'am.
Yeah. How free are women writers is something which I have talked about. And I think right now we have reached a stage where women are not shying away from saying things which they could not have done earlier. So I think to a large extent, women have come out of that fear of society and fear of repercussions. But
Yes.
Thank you. We'll move on to Ms. Gayatri.
Can you?
Ms. Gayatri. I think Gayatri is offline. We'll move on to Galaxy M31. She's trying to ask the first question. Galaxy M31. Ma'am, could you? Yes, now you're audible. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
First of all, Shashi ma'am, it's honestly an honor to meet you, and I'm quite happy to say we have one of your novels on our syllabus.
Okay.
Small Remedies.
Okay.
So, ma'am, I actually have a question regarding the classic novel To Kill a Mockingbird. I believe it was released during the 60s, around the time, I guess, when black rights were, I guess, still being voiced about. So I want to know how that novel didn't face any censorship.
Yeah. You know, that novel, again, I'm muted. Am I? Can you hear me?
No, ma'am, we can hear you.
You can hear me, okay. So what I'm trying to say is that that novel was not a novel which would attract any kind of a ban or censorship, mainly because it was not, it was both the black and white views were there. You know, you had the black victim and you had the white lawyer who helped him out of it. You know, and that was really a book about two children. And I'm so glad they didn't do anything to that book because it is one of the most beautiful books ever written. And I think that it would have been a shame. So I don't know why they didn't. I'm sorry, I don't have any inside knowledge. But I think it is because there was nothing in it to offend anyone. You know, people have become very sensitive today. They were not so sensitive earlier. Suddenly, people are becoming, sensitive to the color of somebody's bikini or sensitive to something else, which is such a minor matter which you have to laugh at. So that atmosphere was not there at the time. It was a more relaxed atmosphere, I think, excepting for, of course, what happened in America, after that, was that the man who oh dear, my age. Well, anyway, there was this whole thing where all writers were asked to swear that they were not at any time part of the Communist Party. That was a huge ruckus there, almost everyone. And our writers were encouraged to sort of tell on each other, that you tell somebody that he was a Communist Party member, I know that, then you were free. So, that kind of a thing happened once in America. And I think it can happen in any country which is afraid. So it comes mainly out of fear. But I don't know about Mockingbird, why it didn't. I'm so glad it didn't. McCarthy, quite right. My memory is really going to pieces now. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll move on to Ms. Shalini Akshita. Ms. Shalini, Shaluni,
Yes, sir.
sorry.
Yes,
You may
sir.
unmute and ask your
Good
question.
morning, ma'am, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah, ma'am, I feel so privileged to hear you speaking in this session. Ma'am, my question is that, like, as a beginner, I have started just writing some of the quotes, some of the stories, little bit of it. But then I think like my idea is not going to reach to the people. Like when I gave them the content to read it out, they say that no, it's not up to that mark. So how to identify that where I'm lacking, like as you said in the beginning, so like how to identify these things, like how it is to be written down?
You're talking about your writing.
Yes, ma'am.
And you want to feel that you're moving on in your writing.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So the point is that you don't think of readers and critics when you're writing, especially in early writing. If I were you, I would not show my writing to anybody, because I think it is a very dreadful thing to submit to people's criticism. And I think it's best that you sort of do your work and you keep it there. You don't do anything with it. Much later, you look at it. You're bound to progress as you go on, because you grow. As you grow in life, you grow in your writing. The two go together. Writing at the age of 17 and writing at the age of 35 are two very different things. The experiences you've had, what you have learned of life, what you have learned of relationships, gives you a completely different point of view. So I think you just write and leave it there. Don't bother about readership. Don't bother about response from anyone. And write what you very sincerely feel. That's all.
Ma'am, then
Yeah.
ma'am, then if suppose my experience is something different from the rest of the people, and I want that my experience should be known to the other people, and
Yeah.
I think that it may be controversial if they come to know about my life experience, then what to do in that case?
There's no, you can never sort of think about what will they, what if, etc. in writing. You very strongly want to write something, you write it. And you don't bother about whether they are going to be opposed to it. Opposition is going to happen. I remember I wrote a story called Death of a Child, which is about a woman who, maybe 40 years ago, maybe more, about a woman who undergoes an abortion, mainly because she feels she can't cope with the third child so soon. There's no other reason. And it ends with the, woman sort of walking away from the hospital, thinking that she has kind of a dead child is with her, as if she has lost a limb, kind of a thing. And then somebody who reviewed made such a nasty comment on that. If she had such a great desire to have the child, why did she undergo an abortion? And the whole thing about writing is it's about a conflict. You're never so clear that there is no conflict in you. She did not want a child, but when the child was gone, it does not mean that she had no regret for that, what happened. So I think these kinds of conflict are really part of what literature is about. So you should not worry about others' responses. You are on your own as a writer. I think that is very important to understand. Nobody is going to, I've said that, nobody is going to encourage you. Nobody is going to support you unless you become a very published and highly successful writer. So don't expect that. just write. And your courage and your strength will come from going on with your writing.
Thank you so much, ma'am. There are few more who wish to ask questions.
Okay.
How many more will you be able to take? Can we stop with 3 more, ma'am? Is it okay?
You ask the host there, not me, but they are in control of the time.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, we'll move on to Xavier. Xavier Jabraj.
Ma'am, good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
It is my pleasure to meet my research writer in a weekend. So thank you for this opportunity, ma'am. And I would like to ask a question. When you were addressed as a feminist writer, you responded to it saying that you are a writer who happened to write about female, and I think you weren't happy about being addressed as a feminist writer. Is it correct, ma'am?
So much there I have to correct. So let me think. I'm a writer, undoubtedly so. And in my life, I'm a feminist. I'm a very strong feminist, and I have been for the last 40, 50 years. But when I write a novel, I'm not a feminist writer in the sense that I do not have an agenda. Nobody can have an agenda when you write. So I write novels. It's creative writing. It comes out of somewhere you do not know where, but you do not sort of manipulate your characters or your story to, make feminism your agenda. That will make it a bad novel. So I am a feminist, yes. I'm a writer, yes, but I'm not a feminist novelist.
Thank you, ma'am. That was my first question, ma'am. The next one is when you write about everything, we could see that domestic clutches on women, which holds their creativity and their career path, which is holding them back. So, do you think that it is being addressed enough in literary arena right now?
You mean the problems of domestic life?
Yeah, ma'am. The problems of domestic life holding the career of women.
Yeah. It's a hard one. I mean, I think there's a lot of sacrifices to be made. You can see that so many women are come to the top in their field, whether it's literature, whether it's science, whether it's medicine. I mean, politics. You don't see too many because I think it's a very demanding 24 hours kind of career. But yes, there is a price to be paid if you're a woman, unless you have somebody very competent to look after your home. That you can never. I mean, like today morning, since I have 9 o'clock, I had to be here. I had to plan my whole morning so that I could sort of, manage to sort of see that things were done without my being there, and at the same time I could be here on time. So it's a constant time management issue. It's also, I think, women have, because of this problem, have become exceedingly good at multitasking. The other day, one of our friends was telling another friend, drink your coffee and then you talk. And I told him she can do both at the same time. She's a woman. Women are very capable of doing many things at the same time. So that is one of the maybe gifts nature has given, or maybe which has been cultivated. So it is exceedingly hard, and for which one needs the support of men. That's so important. Wherever there's a male support, a spouse, a father, a brother, whatever, things are better.
Thank you, ma'am. That was a wonderful answer. Ma'am, can we get your email ID for my research? I would like to interview you. So, is it possible?
Yeah, you can ask Dr. Rajan.
Sure, ma'am. Sure. Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, we'll take one more question.
Yeah.
And then we'll wind up. Ma'am Shanti Chitra may ask a question now.
Okay.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, it's been a privilege in a true sense that I'm here talking to you. you've been one of the pioneers who have set a path for women today to emerge out from, the past shackles.
Hmm.
But in spite of all that, we still find that we have left men somewhere behind. They're not able to have traveled along with us. The gender seem to be affecting the interpretation of any text. So, in spite of all the writings that women have, given to the society today, in spite of however much a woman has written about the way she is limited by the world and by the male mindset,
Hmm.
it seems they have not learned much and they seem to be a slow learner. So how long are we going to take to walk together? They are, I find, are left somewhere behind.
Well, I think walking together is a beautiful concept. Um, I think they have been under the illusion that they have to always walk ahead of us, you know. So
Yeah.
that is a handicap they have to, learn to fight against and think that we have to walk together. I don't have to be ahead of her. So, when that happens, maybe I'll continue to say that it's feminism is fine, but men need to join the thing and know that feminism is not against them. It is for togetherness. It's for men and women to learn to live together and not to oppress anyone. Neither must oppress the other. And that all of us must have choices, male or female. That my choices should not be limited because I'm a woman. So, I think your question is very thought-provoking. And also, I'm hopeful. I see younger people a little better, but again, I see all these so-called, murders and rapes and all that, and I'm in despair. I'm in despair. What do you think women are? I find that I just cannot digest this kind of cruelty that is going on. What is it due to? Is it because women are learning to move on? Is it because women are in a better position today? Do you want them to stay down under your feet where they were? Is that why you do this? And I know there are millions of very decent men, very good fathers, brothers, husbands. But there are some of them who are so terrible that, I really despair for humanity. I mean, equality is not just in getting jobs and all. Equality is in thinking of each other with respect. And this is what I was complaining of in my two stories about the way I was treated by this interviewer in Australia and by the magazine in India. There's no respect for me when they spoke that way and when asked stupid questions and said that they didn't meant no disrespect by calling me a grandmother. So I asked him, would you call a man that? And there's no reply because they would not. I know that. So I think unless there is a mutual respect and unless a woman is not looked at only as a body to enjoy and a body to produce children, that has to go, has to go. So it hurts that it's not happening.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I just hope a beautiful day do dawn one day, like we will find whatever our dreams are. Then
I won't be there, but I hope all of you young women see that day.
Thank you, ma'am.